Dr. Jake Coleman pressed his face against the viewport of the research vessel horizon and watched the stars drift by at normal speed. Normal speed meant boring speed in the outer rim territories where humans were allowed to work alongside their alien colleagues. He had been out here for 2 years now, and still felt the sting of limitation every time he saw an alien ship disappear in a flash of light, jumping to warp, while his vessel crawled through space like an ancient sailboat. The coffee in his metal cup had gone cold again, but Jake barely noticed. His attention was fixed on the data streams flowing across his workstation screen. As a physicist specializing in energy patterns, he spent most of his days analyzing the leftover radiation from alien warp jumps, trying to understand the basic principles that everyone insisted were beyond human comprehension. The Galactic Council had been very clear about this from the day Earth joined their community 50 years ago. Warp travel required special biological neural patterns that only 3 species possessed, and humans were not one of them. Commander Lisa Rogers walked through the research bay, checking on her team of human scientists. She moved with the confident stride of someone who had spent 20 years in space, first with Earth's exploration fleet, and now as part of the galactic community. Her dark hair was pulled back in the regulation style that all human personnel were required to maintain aboard mixed-species vessels. She paused beside Jake's workstation and glanced at his screens. "Still trying to crack the impossible?" she asked with a slight smile. Jake looked up from his data. "The radiation patterns don't make sense if you assume the aliens are telling us the whole truth about how warp drives work." Lisa's expression grew serious. She had heard this kind of talk from Jake before, and it always made her nervous. Questioning alien technology was technically allowed, but pushing too hard could result in humans losing their research privileges entirely. The Galactic Council treated humanity like children who needed protection from dangerous toys, and Lisa knew that any sign of rebellion could make things much worse for everyone. "Be careful what you say out loud," she warned quietly. "The Zephyrians have excellent hearing." Jake nodded, but his eyes remained fixed on the data. 3 different alien species controlled warp technology, and each one told the same story. The Zephyrians claimed their ethereal consciousness could navigate the chaos of warp space without being destroyed. The Karathi insisted their crystalline minds could process the mathematical impossibilities that warp travel required. The Nexari, with their biomechanical bodies, supposedly provided the perfect interface between biological thought and mechanical systems. Together, these 3 species had created a monopoly on faster-than-light travel that had lasted for over 1,000 years. But Jake saw something different in the data. Every warp signature showed the same basic pattern underneath all the alien explanations. Energy flowed in predictable ways that had nothing to do with special biology or impossible mathematics. It looked more like a puzzle that required pattern recognition than some mystical biological requirement. Dr. Amy Foster approached Jake's station carrying a cup of fresh coffee and a concerned expression. As the ship's neuroscientist, she had spent considerable time studying the alien claims about biological requirements for warp travel. Her research consistently showed that human brains processed information in ways that were actually superior to alien minds in many areas, particularly when it came to recognizing patterns in chaotic data. "I intercepted some interesting conversations today," Amy said quietly, settling into the chair beside Jake. The Karathi scientists were discussing something they called psychological barriers in relation to warp navigation. Jake's attention snapped away from his screens. "Psychological barriers, not biological ones?" Amy nodded carefully, glancing around to make sure no alien crew members were within hearing distance. "They seem to be saying that certain minds simply cannot accept the reality of warp space, so those minds fail to navigate it successfully." This was exactly what Jake had been suspecting for months. The alien explanations about special biology had never made scientific sense to him. Biology was just chemistry, and chemistry followed predictable rules. But psychology was different. Psychology could create limitations that had nothing to do with physical reality. Commander Rogers overheard their conversation and moved closer. Her expression showed the internal conflict she faced every day as the leader of the human research team. On one hand, she was responsible for following Galactic Council regulations and keeping her people safe. On the other hand, she had not joined the space program to accept limitations that might not even be real. "What exactly are you two suggesting?" she asked. Jake pulled up a new screen showing comparative brain scans between humans and the three warp-capable species. Amy had been collecting this data for months as part of her approved research into human neural adaptation to space travel. The scans showed clear differences, but not the kind that would prevent humans from handling complex navigation tasks. Human brains are actually better at processing chaotic information than any of the alien species, Amy explained. "We evolved as hunters and problem solvers on a world that required constant adaptation. Our pattern recognition abilities are exceptional." Jake added his own analysis to the discussion. "Every piece of data I have studied suggests that warp travel is fundamentally about recognizing patterns in apparently random energy fluctuations. If that is true, then humans should be naturally gifted at it." The three humans looked at each other in silence for several moments. They were discussing something that went against everything the Galactic Council had taught them about their place in the universe. But the evidence was becoming impossible to ignore. Commander Rogers made a decision that would change everything. "Show me your data. All of it. If you are right about this, we need to know." Jake began pulling up files on his workstation. Months of careful analysis that had led him to his current conclusions. The radiation patterns, the energy signatures, the mathematical models that the aliens claimed were impossible for human minds to understand. All of it pointed toward the same conclusion. "I accidentally intercepted part of a warp drive schematic last week during a routine data transfer," Jake admitted. "The safety requirements are not biological at all. They are psychological barriers that the aliens have built up over thousands of years." Amy leaned forward intently. "Which means humans might be able to use warp technology if we approach it differently than the aliens do." Commander Rogers felt a mixture of excitement and terror at the implications. If they were right, humanity had been denied its rightful place among the stars based on false assumptions. If they were wrong, they could all die in the attempt to prove their theory. But looking at the data spread across Jake's screens, she began to suspect they were not wrong at all. 3 weeks after their initial discovery, Jake Coleman found himself working in complete secrecy alongside Dr. Amy Foster and Chief Engineer Pete Harrison. Commander Rogers had given them official permission to conduct theoretical research into human neural adaptation, which provided perfect cover for their real work. Pete had joined their group after Amy showed him the brain scan data and explained what they were really trying to accomplish. Pete was exactly the kind of engineer every secret project needed. He had spent 15 years working on human spacecraft systems and knew how to acquire parts without asking too many questions. More importantly, he understood how to modify existing technology in ways that would not attract attention from the alien crew members aboard the Horizon. The three humans worked during off-duty hours in Amy's laboratory, which was located in a section of the ship that aliens rarely visited. Amy had designed the lab for studying human psychological responses to long-term space travel, so their presence there seemed perfectly normal to any casual observer. The real work happened after midnight when the alien crew members were in their rest cycles. Jake had spent weeks analyzing the partial warp drive schematic he had intercepted, breaking down its components into understandable pieces. What he found convinced him that humans had been deliberately misled about the complexity of warp technology. The drive systems were sophisticated but not impossible to understand. More importantly, they seemed to be designed around psychological limitations rather than physical ones. "Look at this section here," Jake explained to Pete and Amy, pointing at a diagram on his tablet. "The aliens call this a neural interface stabilizer, but it is really just a pattern recognition system. It takes chaotic data from warp space and presents it in a format that the alien mind can process without panic." Pete studied the diagram carefully. As an engineer, he understood systems design better than most people, and what he saw disturbed him. "This looks like training wheels for a bicycle. They built a machine to help them do something that should be natural." Amy nodded agreement. "Human brains do not need this kind of assistance. We are already equipped to handle chaotic pattern recognition. In fact, adding this system might actually make warp navigation harder for us. They had been building their own version of a warp field generator for 2 weeks, using components that Pete had quietly acquired from the ship's maintenance supplies. Their version was much simpler than the alien design because they had removed all the psychological support systems that the 3 species required. What remained was a basic field generator that could create a small warp bubble around a test object. Their first test involved sending a small probe through a tiny warp field that lasted for less than a second. Jake had programmed the probe with sensors that would record everything it experienced during the brief journey. When the probe returned successfully with intact data, all 3 humans realized they had crossed a line that could never be uncrossed. The probe worked perfectly, Jake announced, reading the sensor data on his screen. Not only did it survive the warp field, but it traveled further than our calculations predicted. Pete examined the probe itself, looking for any signs of damage from its journey through warp space. The aliens had always claimed that unprepared objects would be torn apart by the forces involved, but the probe showed no wear at all. If anything, it seemed to have been cleaned by the experience. Amy ran the sensor data through her analysis programs, comparing it to the radiation signatures that Jake had been studying for months. The patterns matched perfectly, confirming that their small warp field had behaved exactly like the larger alien drives, but the efficiency readings were much higher than anything in the alien literature. "We need to tell Commander Rogers about this immediately," Amy said. Jake shook his head. "Not yet. One successful test with a probe is not enough evidence. We need to prove that this works consistently before we risk everyone's career." Over the next week, they conducted 17 more tests with increasingly complex objects. Each test confirmed their theory that humans could handle warp technology more naturally than the aliens suspected. The objects always returned intact, and the energy efficiency continued to exceed alien specifications. But their secret work had not gone completely unnoticed. Commander Rogers appeared in Amy's laboratory during their 18th test, arriving just as Jake was preparing to send a probe through a warp field large enough to accommodate a small spacecraft. "What exactly are you 3 doing in here?" she asked, though her tone suggested she already knew the answer. Jake, Amy, and Pete looked at each other nervously. They had known this moment would come eventually, but they had hoped to have more concrete proof before being discovered. "We are testing a theory about human capability with warp technology," Amy admitted. Commander Rogers studied their improvised equipment and the data screens showing successful test results. As a military officer, she understood both the potential benefits and the enormous risks of what her team was attempting. If they were wrong about human capability, they could all be killed in an accident that would end human participation in galactic research forever. But if they were right, they were on the verge of changing humanity's place in the universe. "Show me everything," she ordered. Jake activated their test system and sent another probe through a warp field while Commander Rogers watched. The probe disappeared for exactly 2.3 seconds and then reappeared in perfect condition. The sensors showed that it had traveled a distance that would have taken conventional propulsion several hours to cover. "How long have you been doing this?" Rogers asked. 3 weeks, Pete admitted. "We have conducted 19 successful tests with no failures." Commander Rogers was quiet for several minutes, studying their data and thinking about the implications. She was responsible for the safety and careers of 37 human researchers aboard the Horizon. Making the wrong decision could end all human participation in galactic science programs, but the evidence in front of her suggested that humanity had been denied its rightful capabilities based on alien assumptions that were simply wrong. "I want Captain Roy Banks brought into this project," she finally decided. "If we are going to test human warp capability, we need our best pilot involved." Roy Banks was the Horizon's senior shuttle pilot and the most experienced human spacecraft operator in the Outer Rim territories. He had logged more flight hours than any other human in the galactic community and was known for his calm response to emergency situations. More importantly, he had been asking questions about warp technology limitations for as long as anyone could remember. When Commander Rogers explained their discovery to Roy, his reaction was immediate and enthusiastic. "I have been waiting my entire career for someone to figure this out," he said, examining their test equipment with obvious excitement. When do we try it with a real spacecraft? Amy looked concerned about the rapid pace of their expansion. We need more data before we risk human life. Maybe we should run more tests. But Jake was already thinking about the next phase of their research. We also need systems analyst Kelly Turner involved. If we are going to attempt human warp travel, we need someone who understands navigation computers. Commander Rogers made another decision that would change everything. Bring Kelly into the project. But from now on, this research has official status under my authority. No more secret meetings, we are going to do this properly. The 5 humans looked at each other, realizing they had just committed to attempting something that could either revolutionize human space travel or get them all killed in the process. Captain Roy Banks felt completely natural as he guided the modified shuttle through its first warp jump. The experience was nothing like what the alien warnings had described. Instead of chaos and terror, he found himself in a space that made perfect sense to his human mind. Patterns flowed around the shuttle in ways that seemed almost familiar, as if he had been navigating warp space his entire life without knowing it. The jump lasted only 30 seconds but covered a distance that should have taken 3 days using conventional propulsion. When the shuttle dropped back into normal space, Roy immediately activated his communication system to report back to the horizon. Commander Rogers, this is Roy. The jump was successful, and I am completely unharmed. Back aboard the horizon, the 5-person human team celebrated their breakthrough with quiet excitement. They had just proven that humans could not only survive warp travel, but could perform it more efficiently than any alien species. But their celebration was interrupted by alarms throughout the ship. Systems analyst Kelly Turner was monitoring deep space sensors when she detected the approaching fleet. Commander, we have multiple alien ships dropping out of warp nearby. It looks like a Galactic Council enforcement squadron. Commander Rogers felt her stomach drop as she realized what was happening. Their unauthorized warp experiments had been detected by monitoring stations throughout the sector. The Galactic Council was responding exactly as she had feared they would, treating human warp capability as a threat to be contained rather than a discovery to be celebrated. The lead ship was a massive Zephyrian vessel commanded by High Commander Veltar, one of the most influential military officers in the Galactic Council. His ship alone was larger than the entire human research station, and the 5 escort vessels that accompanied him represented the military might of all 3 warp-capable species working together. Human Vessel Horizon, you are ordered to prepare. For immediate boarding and inspection, came the transmission from Veltar's ship. We have detected unauthorized warp field generation in this sector and require all research data to be turned over to Council authorities. Commander Rogers activated the ship's general communications system to address her crew. All human personnel report to designated stations immediately. We are about to receive visitors from the Galactic Council. Jake Coleman, Amy Foster, and Pete Harrison quickly secured their experimental equipment, while Kelly Turner backed up all their research data to hidden storage systems. They had anticipated this moment and prepared for it, but actually facing a Council enforcement fleet was more intimidating than any of them had expected. Roy Banks docked his shuttle just minutes before the alien boarding parties arrived. His successful warp jump had been detected by sensors across multiple star systems, and there was no longer any possibility of keeping their breakthrough secret from the galactic authorities. High Commander Veltar himself led the boarding party, accompanied by Dr. Zenkri of the Karathi Science Division and Engineer Prime Nexala of the Nexari Technical Corps. The 3 aliens represented the combined authority of the species that had controlled warp technology for over 1,000 years, and their presence aboard the human research vessel sent a clear message about how seriously the Council was taking this situation. Commander Rogers, Veltar began, his ethereal form flickering with agitation. Our monitoring stations have recorded multiple unauthorized warp field activations originating from this vessel. This represents a violation of Galactic Council safety protocols that could have resulted in catastrophic consequences. Commander Rogers stood at attention, but did not back down from her position. High Commander, my team has been conducting authorized research into human neural adaptation to space travel. All activities have been within the parameters of our research charter. Dr. Zenkri's crystalline body chimed with disbelief. Human neural adaptation does not require warp field generation. Your species lacks the biological requirements necessary for safe warp travel. What you have been doing is incredibly dangerous. To yourselves and potentially to this entire sector of space. Jake stepped forward despite Commander Rogers' warning look. With respect, Dr. Zenkri, our research indicates that the biological requirements you describe may not actually exist. Human brains appear to be naturally capable of processing the pattern recognition tasks that warp navigation requires. Engineer, Prime Nexala's mechanical components whirred with what sounded like laughter. Impossible. The psychological barriers alone would destroy an unprepared human mind within seconds of entering warp space. Your species has been protected from this knowledge for your own safety. Amy Foster joined the conversation with her research data displayed on a portable screen. Our tests show that human consciousness handles chaotic pattern recognition better than any of the founding species. We do not experience the psychological barriers that make warp navigation difficult for your people. The three alien investigators looked at each other with expressions that ranged from disbelief to genuine concern. The idea that humans could naturally excel at something that their species had struggled with for millennia was simply incomprehensible to them. You must cease all research activities immediately, High Commander Veltar declared. All equipment will be confiscated and all personnel involved will be detained for their own protection. This madness ends now. Commander Rogers stepped between her team and the alien authorities. I cannot allow you to detain my people without evidence of wrongdoing. They have broken no laws and injured no one. The standoff might have continued indefinitely if Roy Banks had not made a decision that changed everything. High Commander, would you be willing to observe a practical demonstration of human warp capability? Dr. Zenkri's crystalline form resonated with alarm. Absolutely not. Such a demonstration would result in certain death for any human who attempted it. But Roy was already moving toward the shuttle bay. Then you will be able to prove your point and end this discussion permanently. If humans cannot handle warp travel, I will not survive the attempt. High Commander Veltar found himself in an impossible situation. He could not allow a human to commit suicide by attempting warp travel, but he also could not prevent the demonstration without admitting that there might be some validity to the human claims. This is madness, he protested. We cannot permit you to destroy yourself to prove a point. Roy Banks was already entering his shuttle and running through pre-flight procedures. Commander Rogers, please inform our guests that they are welcome to monitor the demonstration from a safe distance. The alien investigators had no choice but to watch as Roy Banks launched his shuttle and activated the improvised warp drive that Pete Harrison had installed. Jake Coleman provided commentary as the sensors tracked the shuttle's progress. Roy is entering warp space now. His vital signs are stable, and he reports no discomfort. Dr. Zenkri stared at the sensor displays in disbelief as the human shuttle traveled across the star system in a matter of minutes, covering distances that would challenge even experienced alien pilots. When Roy returned to the horizon and docked his shuttle with obvious ease, the three alien investigators were forced to confront a reality that challenged everything they thought they knew about the universe. This is impossible, Engineer Prime Nexala repeated, but her mechanical voice carried uncertainty rather than conviction. High Commander Veltar looked at Commander Rogers with an expression that showed his worldview had been fundamentally shaken. We must report this to the full Galactic Council immediately. The implications are beyond anything we are qualified to address. For the first time in galactic history, the impossible had become possible, and no one knew what would happen next. The emergency session of the Galactic Council convened just 48 hours after Roy Banks demonstrated human warp capability. Representatives from hundreds of species gathered in the Great Assembly Hall on the neutral world of Concordia Prime, but the real discussion was happening in smaller groups throughout the massive complex. For the first time in recorded galactic history, the fundamental assumptions about warp travel had been proven wrong. Dr. Amy Foster worked alongside reluctant alien scientists in a hastily established research facility on the planet's surface. The Galactic Council had demanded immediate investigation into how humans could accomplish what their best scientists had declared impossible. Amy found herself explaining basic human neurology to beings who had spent centuries studying consciousness and thought patterns. Human brains evolve differently than yours, she explained to a group of Karathi researchers, displaying brain scan comparisons on a large holographic screen. We developed as hunters and problem solvers on a world that required constant adaptation to changing conditions. Our pattern recognition abilities became exceptional because our survival depended on them. Dr. Zenkri, who had witnessed Roy's demonstration firsthand, studied the human brain scans with fascination rather than disbelief. His earlier certainty about human limitations had been completely shattered by watching a human pilot navigate warp space with natural ease. Your neural pathways process chaotic information in ways that we never considered possible, he admitted. Where we see randomness and danger in warp space, you apparently see patterns and opportunities. Meanwhile, Jake Coleman found himself defending human research methods to a panel of Zephyrian investigators who seemed determined to find fault with everything humanity had discovered. High Commander Veltar led the questioning with obvious reluctance, clearly struggling with the implications of human warp capability. Your unauthorized experiments could have resulted in catastrophic consequences, Veltar insisted. Warp space contains forces that can tear apart unprepared minds and destroy entire star systems if mishandled. Jake remained calm despite the aggressive questioning. Our research shows that these catastrophic forces exist primarily in the psychological barriers that your species have created. Humans do not experience those barriers, so we do not face the same risks. The political implications of human warp capability were becoming clear throughout the galactic community. 3 distinct factions had emerged among the alien species, each with different ideas about how to handle this unprecedented situation. The protectionists, led by High Commander Veltar and supported by many military leaders, believed that humans represented a dangerous unknown that must be strictly controlled. They argued for immediate restrictions on human warp research and continued oversight of all human space activities. The collaborationists, including Dr. Zenkri and many scientists, saw the potential for revolutionary advancement through cooperation with humanity. They pushed for joint research projects that would combine human intuitive navigation with alien scientific precision. A growing separatist movement wanted to quarantine humanity entirely, fearing that human capabilities might destabilize the carefully maintained balance of galactic civilization. They proposed restricting human travel and limiting contact between humans and other species. Captain Roy Banks had become the center of attention throughout the galaxy as news of his successful warp demonstration spread to every inhabited world. He spent his days training other human pilots who had volunteered for the expanded warp program, and their success rate continued to exceed every prediction. It feels completely natural, reported pilot Lisa Chen after her first solo warp jump. I do not understand why everyone was so worried about it. Captain Danny Wright, another volunteer pilot, had similar experiences during his training flights. The patterns in warp space make sense to me immediately. It is like reading a map that was written in a language I already knew. Kelly Turner made a discovery that sent shockwaves through the scientific community when she analyzed the navigation data from human warp flights. Humans were not just capable of safe warp travel, they were accomplishing things that alien computers insisted were theoretically impossible. Look at these flight paths, she explained to Commander Rogers and the rest of the human team. Roy and the other pilots are taking shortcuts through warp space that bypass the safe routes the aliens have used for centuries. They are finding connections that should not exist. The shortcuts Kelly had discovered represented a fundamental change in understanding warp space topology. The aliens had spent thousands of years mapping safe routes through warp space, avoiding areas that their instruments indicated were dangerous or impassable, but human pilots were navigating directly through those supposedly dangerous areas without any difficulty. Pete Harrison worked with alien engineers to understand why human warp drives operated so much more efficiently than alien systems. His analysis showed that the psychological support systems that aliens required actually interfered with optimal warp field generation. They have been using training wheels for so long that they forgot how to ride the bicycle, he explained to Engineer Prime Nexala, who had become surprisingly cooperative once her initial disbelief was overcome. The breakthrough moment came when Captain Roy Banks and Navigator Chris Parker volunteered for an experimental long-distance jump that would test the limits of human warp capability. The jump covered a distance that would take the fastest alien ship several weeks to traverse, but Roy completed it in less than 6 hours. More importantly, Roy and Chris reported seeing something during their extended time in warp space that no alien had ever mentioned in thousands of years of warp travel. "There are structures in warp space," Roy reported when he returned to the research station. "Artificial constructions that look like they were built by some advanced civilization. They are invisible to your sensors but clearly visible to human consciousness navigating warp space." Chris Parker supported Roy's report with detailed observations. "The structures form a network throughout warp space. They look ancient, but they are definitely artificial. Some kind of transportation system that has been there all along, hidden from alien perception." Dr. Amy Foster realized immediately what Roy and Chris had discovered. The structures are only visible to minds that can process warp space naturally. The aliens have been using technological assistance for so long that they have lost the ability to perceive what is actually there. Jake Coleman began analyzing the data from Roy and Chris's extended jump, comparing it to the radiation patterns he had been studying for years. The ancient structures explained many of the anomalies in warp space that alien science had never been able to account for. "This changes everything," he announced to the assembled researchers. "Warp space is not empty chaos. It contains a vast network of transportation nodes left by some precursor civilization." High Commander Veltar found himself in an impossible position. His entire understanding of the galaxy had been proven wrong in a matter of days, and now humans were reporting discoveries that suggested alien science had missed something fundamental about the nature of reality itself. "We must verify these claims immediately," he declared, but his voice carried uncertainty rather than authority. Dr. Zenkri was more direct in his assessment. "If humans are correct about these structures, then we have been traveling through warp space for millennia without understanding what we were actually navigating through." The discovery of the precursor network marked the moment when humanity stopped being junior members of the galactic community and became essential partners in understanding the universe itself. Captain Sandy Wright and Navigator Chris Parker made galactic history when they discovered the first active node in the precursor network. Their exploration mission had started as a routine test of human long-distance warp capability, but it became something much more significant when they encountered a structure that responded to human presence. "The node is definitely reacting to our approach," Sandy reported as her ship moved closer to the ancient construct. "It is generating some kind of energy field that my instruments cannot identify." Chris monitored the navigation systems while Sandy piloted their vessel toward the mysterious structure. What they found changed everything humanity thought they knew about warp travel and galactic history. "Commander Rogers, we are seeing instant transportation capabilities," Chris announced over the communication system. "This node appears to be connected to similar structures throughout the galaxy. We could travel anywhere in seconds instead of hours." Back on Concordia Prime, the joint research facility had become the center of frantic activity as alien and human scientists worked together to understand the implications of the precursor network. Dr. Amy Foster coordinated with teams of researchers from dozens of species, all trying to comprehend how an entire civilization's transportation system had remained hidden for so long. Jake Coleman spent his days analyzing data from human exploration missions, building a map of the network that grew larger every day. The scale of what they were discovering was almost beyond comprehension. "The network covers the entire galaxy," he explained to a gathering of Galactic Council representatives. "There are millions of nodes connected by pathways that allow instantaneous travel between any 2 points. The precursor civilization that built this system had capabilities that make our current technology look primitive." Dr. Zenkri had become humanity's strongest advocate among the alien scientific community. His initial skepticism had transformed into enthusiastic support as he witnessed discovery after discovery that confirmed human capabilities. "We must acknowledge that human consciousness perceives warp space differently than our own," he declared to the Galactic Council Assembly. They are showing us things that have been there all along, invisible to our perception but fundamental to understanding the true nature of the universe. High Commander Veltar struggled with the political implications of these discoveries. The military balance that had maintained galactic peace for centuries was being challenged by humanity's natural advantages in warp navigation. If humans can use this precursor network for instantaneous travel, they will have military capabilities that exceed anything we can match, he warned the Council leadership. We must consider the security implications. But Commander Lisa Rogers had a different perspective on the situation. She had accepted the position of first human representative to an expanded Galactic Council, and her first official action was to propose a comprehensive cooperation agreement between humanity and the alien species. We are not interested in military dominance, she declared to the assembled representatives. We want to work together to understand what happened to the civilization that built this network and why it is damaged in many sectors. The damage to the precursor network had become a growing concern as human explorers mapped more of its extent. Many nodes showed signs of ancient destruction, and entire sections of the network appeared to have been deliberately shut down. Captain Roy Banks led the first joint human-alien expedition to investigate the damaged areas, working with alien specialists who brought scientific instruments that complemented human intuitive perception. What they found disturbed everyone involved in the mission. Something attacked the network builders, Roy reported after exploring a sector where dozens of nodes had been destroyed. The damage patterns suggest a systematic campaign to disable their transportation system. Pete Harrison analyzed the wreckage of destroyed nodes and found evidence that supported Roy's assessment. Whatever did this had technology advanced enough to threaten a civilization that could build instantaneous transportation across an entire galaxy. Amy Foster made the connection that explained everything when she compared the network damage to galactic archaeological records. The destruction happened approximately 50,000 years ago, during the same time period when multiple advanced civilizations disappeared from the galactic record. The realization that some ancient threat had once swept through the galaxy, destroying advanced civilizations and their transportation networks, created new urgency around the cooperation between humans and aliens. Jake Coleman worked with alien historians to piece together what had happened during that ancient catastrophe. The network builders tried to shut down their system to prevent their attackers from using it, but they were not completely successful. Some sections remained active, hidden, and waiting for minds capable of perceiving them naturally. Dr. Zenkri proposed the theory that changed everything about galactic strategy. The precursor network has been waiting for a species like humans to rediscover it. The original builders may have designed it to remain invisible to minds that rely on technological assistance rather than natural perception. Captain Sandy Wright and Chris Parker continued their exploration of active network nodes, mapping pathways that connected distant sectors of the galaxy. Their discoveries showed that the network was not just a transportation system, but also a communications array and possibly a defensive mechanism. Some nodes are definitely designed for more than transportation, Sandy reported during one of her missions. We are seeing data storage capabilities and what looks like sensor networks monitoring deep space. The possibility that the precursor network included early warning systems for detecting threats from outside the galaxy made cooperation between species an absolute necessity. No single species, not even humanity with its natural warp advantages, could handle such a challenge alone. Commander Rogers addressed the full Galactic Council with humanity's final proposal for moving forward together. We propose a joint exploration and defense initiative that combines human intuitive navigation with alien scientific and technological capabilities. Together, we can restore the network, understand what destroyed its builders, and prepare for any future threats. High Commander Veltar, who had begun the crisis as humanity's greatest opponent, became an unlikely ally when he realized the scope of what they were facing together. The Galactic Council accepts humanity's proposal for joint operations, he announced officially. We will combine our resources and capabilities to address threats that no single species could handle alone. The first joint mission to the Galactic Core launched 6 months later, with Captain Roy Banks commanding a mixed crew of humans and aliens aboard the most advanced exploration vessel ever constructed. Their mission was to locate the central hub of the precursor network and determine whether the ancient builders had left any information about the threat that had destroyed them. As Roy's ship disappeared into warp space, heading toward the center of the galaxy, Jake Coleman taught a class of mixed human and alien children how to visualize warp space patterns. The young aliens struggled with concepts their elders insisted were impossible, while human children saw the patterns immediately. The next generation will not know a galaxy where humans and aliens see the universe differently, Amy Foster observed, watching Jake work with the children. They will grow up understanding that the impossible is often just another word for not yet discovered. Commander Rogers looked out at the stars from her new office on Concordia Prime, knowing that humanity had gone from galactic newcomers to essential partners in less than a year. The precursor network remained largely unexplored. Ancient threats might still exist beyond the galaxy, and countless discoveries waited to be made by minds willing to see beyond conventional limitations. But for the first time since joining the galactic community, humans were not asking permission to explore the universe. They were leading the way into a future that no one had imagined possible, proving that sometimes the most revolutionary breakthroughs come from those who refuse to accept that something cannot be done.